Hi there, I am Rae Sikora and coming to you from Glorieta, New Mexico, near Santa Fe. And first I want to start out just saying 45 years ago, I never had heard the word vegan. I didn't know, anyone who was vegan. There wasn't a V on packages. It was just a different world then, and I was renting a house from this farmer, and he was a dairy farmer, and one day I hear all this sound coming from his farm, and we were on the same piece of land, and I got on my bike and I rode over to see what the commotion was because it was a sound I hadn't heard before. And when I went down his long driveway, there was a truck, and he and another guy were pushing these baby calves, some of them still with wet umbilical cords, and they were shaking, and they were crying for their moms, and you could hear the moms screaming for the babies. And I asked my landlord if I could go see the moms, and he said, yeah, but don't get all upset. They'll get over it, and the babies will get over it. And what he told me was that those were the male calves, and I had never connected it. At that point, I was a vegetarian, and I had never connected that in order for us to get the milk, they take away the babies. And the males are of no use in that industry because the cows were artificially inseminated. So all of these male calves were going to a veal facility. And that broke my heart right there. And then I went and I walked behind the barn and I saw the moms, mouths wide open, bellowing for their babies. Some of them were bleeding at their chests because they were getting scraped up by the barbed wire. And I witnessed that, and it just clicked. Boom, the light bulb went on, my heart opened. And I didn't know the word vegan, but I knew I was never going to do dairy again. And I came around and I said to my landlord, I said, Melvin, that's it, no more dairy for me. I do not want to support this. He said, you'll get over it. I said, I don't want to get over it. I don't want to ever forget what I saw here today. And I never had dairy again after that. No milk, no cheese, nothing, no dairy. And then that kind of opened my mind, and I started investigating. I thought, what is my lifestyle supporting? What am I doing with my daily choices that I don't have a clue about? I didn't have a clue about this, about dairy. I've been drinking and eating dairy since I was a kid and never made that connection that it's a stolen product from suffering animals. So then I started investigating and found out about the egg industry. And I would personally visit these places because there wasn't really a place to get the information back then. It wasn't like, oh, I'll go online and I'll find out, how much cruelty is in the egg industry or, in the industrial fishing industry. And so I just started investigating on my own. And the more I investigated, the more suffering I found in these industries. As soon as a living being is considered to be a product, or their excretions are considered to be a product, they're going to suffer. So I just stopped consuming it all animal products. And I don't remember how long it was. It might have been a couple years later when I met a woman who called herself vegan. And I said, what is that exactly? Like, what is vegan? And she told me what it was. I was so excited. I said, that's me. That's me. I have a name for me now. I was so excited to have a name for me. And it kind of grew from there. When you're passionate about something and it seems like everyone should know it, you want to shout it from the rooftops. That really set the course for my life. I wanted to help people align their deepest core caring values with their daily choices. But I realized people couldn't align their daily choices and their values unless they were educated about the realities of those industries. People don't know what's going on behind closed doors, closed gates, in labs, on farms. And so then I thought, I want to educate people about this. And I chose Humane Education as a path to this. I wanted to get it in the schools. And I wanted every child to know and to make an educated, critical thinking choice about how they were going to live their lives. And how were they going to take what they cared about deeply, who they loved, what they loved? How was that going to show up in their lives on a daily basis with all their choices? So education kind of became my thing. And along with that, a lot of activism, just working on that. And I think the core of it, the core of trying to open people's hearts to this, is really helping people who are looking at the world in a way, okay, if I look here, do I see an individual dog or do I just see dog? Do I see a living being? Part of the issue that we have is that we're judging the world in terms of what group someone belongs to. So I don't want to just be seen as a white woman. I want to be seen as an individual. I don't want to just be seen as part of my group. And I want to be respected and seen as who I am, not just, oh, this group. But this is kind of the core of what's going on with other species. We don't see individuals. We don't see an individual pig. You can hear about a truck getting into an accident and 150 pigs, are dead from this semi that's transporting the pigs. And people just think, oh, group of pigs. They don't think, wow, 150 feeling, emotional, thinking, living beings who don't want to suffer. It's very hard for us to really see individuals. But as soon as you do, you can no longer just say, oh, they're just in this group and I don't have compassion for that group. Whether it's another group of humans, and it happens in the news all the time. It's around the world. It's another culture of humans. And so we have a hard time relating. 2,000 people were killed in this bombing. Who are those people? Who are those individuals? So I do think that that's really at the core of it, is for people to realize that every living being wants to live without suffering. And that each of us can make these choices that really cause less suffering in the world. And we have these choices every day. Will I do this or will I do this? Nobody's causing zero suffering. It's impossible in the world. We're all causing a little suffering without even realizing it. But we can always go, which one causes less suffering? What's the kindest, most compassionate thing I can do in this moment? What can I do? What is the choice that is the most compassionate? And if people could just stop and do that in all of their choices, it would be a very, very different world. It would be a world that's really based on empathy and compassion and love rather than what's in it for me. And, I keep doing my work hoping that that world spreads more and more, a world based on compassion and not wanting to cause needless suffering to others. If I think back on before I was vegan, it's a little bit hard to think back on physically, emotionally, spiritually, how did I feel back then? It was 45 years ago, so it's a long time. But I do know that I was I was floundering in the world. So mentally, it was really wonderful to find something that meant something to me, that I was passionate about. And it really gave me my life's purpose, is to create a more compassionate world. So mentally, it was great for me. My confidence built. Physically, wow. I can't imagine. I was young then, so I had a ton of energy. But I think typically when someone then, later in life, you hit 65 years old and, your energy isn't quite what it was. Or I haven't experienced that. So that's pretty wonderful. Can I say it's definitely from being vegan? I'd like to say it's definitely from that. It's no scientific study that I've conducted on myself, but I think it has to do with that. If you think about why someone would choose to practice veganism, and I often say practice veganism because we're constantly learning new ways to be compassionate. To say I am vegan is like, oh, it's a finished product. But I say, oh, we're practicing veganism because we're always getting new information. Oh, I could be kinder here. I don't think I want to purchase this. And people come through different doors. So some people come through the environmental door. Some people come through the health door. Some people come through the compassion for animals, nonviolence door. And I think that whatever door someone first comes in to experience and practice veganism often leads them to the other doors. You know, they often discover the other. So I don't think one is more important than the other, personally. I do think that from my experience, the people who come through the animal cruelty and nonviolence door tend to be lifetime committed. It's rare that they're going to turn around because they hear about some other diet, or it's rare that they're going to just be like, I know it's not good for the environment, but I'm going to eat this. It's very rare. So I have to say I have a little bit of a bias toward that door, the nonviolence door, and saying that, I still think it's important to recognize that people coming through the other doors often end up exploring that. You know, I think of my sister as an example. She was here hiking with me. She had no inclination to be vegan, even vegetarian, none. She and I were hiking, and I was wearing shorts, and she grabbed my thigh, and she was like, how come you don't have cellulite? And I'm like, I don't know why I don't have cellulite. She kept like squeezing my thighs. Why don't you have cellulite? I think it's because you're vegan. So she's actually the only person I know who came through the cellulite door to become vegan. By the time she was at the airport after visiting me, she called and she said, that's it, I'm vegan. Now you would think that somebody who comes through that door would never be animal rights. Within a year, less than a year, she was totally animal rights, environmental, and outspoken about it. So she's a perfect example of someone coming through a door where you would never expect that they would end up in the nonviolence compassion area. And now she's all about it. And, you know, I love that because I must have needed it right in my face that every door is important, whatever leads you to compassion, because her path, I could have never predicted that one. So, you know, you often will hear, especially in my line of work that I've been doing, you know, which is teaching compassion for other beings, where people will say, oh, that's fine for you, but don't tell me what to do. It's really my business what I do, and it's your business what you do. So as much as I do understand people feeling like that, I also feel like what they see as a personal choice is often causing suffering for my chosen family, my extended family of living beings, whether it's marine life or land animals who are suffering because their taste buds want to, you know, eat something or they want to wear something. And so I feel like, let's say it was human children who were suffering because of their choices. Nobody would have a problem with me speaking up. I would speak up about it every chance I got. Or if it was a racial issue, I'd speak up about it. Of course, it's an injustice. So I feel like it's okay to speak up for injustice, and I do feel like we're, you know, it's like the moral arc that Martin Luther King talked about, that the moral arc is moving toward compassion and justice. And so I feel like my part in that is not to remain silent. And it's not like I think I can change other people, but I do feel like it's important to not be silent when you see an injustice. A lot of people think that vegan is just a diet. It's just what you eat. Would I like to see a vegan world? Do I think everyone should be vegan? Absolutely, because it isn't a diet. Vegan is about saying, I do not want my life to cause suffering to other life whenever possible, in all areas. And that kind of compassion, even if someone really cares mostly about humans, it's the compassionate thing for humans too. Creating this compassionate, healthy world, it's in our hands to do that. So yes, of course, I'd like to see the whole world go vegan. You know, when I chose this vegan path, I think the biggest challenges were socially with family. That was really tough. And, you know, my biological family certainly didn't understand why I was doing this, and they thought I just wanted to be different, which wasn't true at all. I always kind of wanted to fit in, but I never figured out where the box was I was supposed to fit in. And it was challenging, you know, like my father would say, he'd pound on the table in the restaurant if we went out to eat like a goddamn normal person. And I stopped going out to eat with my family and, at different events. I didn't want to stand out too much, weddings and whatnot. There was always a special thing that was served to me rather than, what everybody else was getting. And I didn't want to be the one who is high maintenance or different. So that was really challenging for me. And then I sort of changed my outlook on it and just the way I felt about it, the way I projected out in the world about it. And I decided, I get to be an invitation for a possibility. And rather than fighting things as they were, I decided to be really inviting about what could be. And it really changed things, So instead of like, I'm not coming to Thanksgiving because you serve this animal. Instead of that, it was, come to my house for Thanksgiving. It will be fabulous. You don't have to cook. And just come enjoy yourself. So I just started to take a different turn in it. And inviting whenever possible, at creating an irresistible community of positive, vegan choices. And it's great. Like now, I can't even believe I ever struggled with it at all, because now I have like an infinite number of chosen family and biological family who are vegan. They choose compassionate living. I can't even keep up with everyone. So it really, I don't know, it's one of the most positive choices I ever made in my life. The beautiful chosen family that I have, the beautiful biological family that I have, who care about more than just humans and human interests. And we have so much in common, and it's like a love fest when we get together. So it's, I couldn't have made a better choice, even though it was a little challenging in the beginning. I think the only regret that I have in terms of my vegan choices is that I didn't do it sooner. And I've heard other people say it have only been vegan for a few years, and even though it has been 45 years for me, it's been a long time, I still think of all the animals who I caused suffering to before that, for the 20 years that I wasn't vegan. And I think that's my only regret, really, is that I didn't, I don't know, it's like I had blinders on. I couldn't see it, and there were glimmers of it. I remember eating at my aunt's house one time, and my brother said, "Don't eat that, it's tongue." Like there's a meat called tongue, and he said, "Don't eat that, it's tongue." I said, "Well, it's not tongue. I was just a kid, and he said, "No, it's tongue, dummy. Don't eat it." And I ran into the kitchen where all the women were, and I said, "Mom, what is tongue?" She said, "It's tongue." I said, "Whose tongue?" And she said, "A cow's tongue." And I couldn't believe it that she would deceive us. I was so angry at her, like, "You have deceived me. You have been letting me eat tongue." But I didn't think about all these other body parts that I was eating that were named things that hit it a little bit more. And I just wish I had, somehow the light bulb had gone off when I was younger, and I knew I loved animals, but it was a limited number of species who I was really open to. And I don't know, I think that's my only regret, that it didn't happen at birth. I really care about sort of the education work. I see the education work as the preventative work of the symptoms that we have, and then the activism I do is dealing with the symptoms. And I like to come at it from both the prevention and the symptoms. When I'm dealing with individuals, whether it's friends, family, strangers, I feel like my job is to ask questions that get those people to ask themselves questions. So I'll give you an example. My partner JC and I were tabling at an environmental conference, and a woman came to our table and she said, "I'm pretty much vegetarian, but I do eat chicken." And I said, "How did you choose chickens as who you would eat? What made you choose them of all the animals you could eat?" And she said, "Well, chickens." I said, "I do know chickens." I said, so what made you choose them? She said, well, you know, they're stupid. And I said, oh. I said, I have a completely different experience of chickens. I said, tell me about your experience with chickens that led you to believe that they are not intelligent. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, just tell me about your experience with them because you think they're stupid. And she said, well, I've never really had any experience with a chicken. I said, oh. I said, I've had so much experience with different chickens in my life at sanctuaries, and I have chicken friends. And I said, would you like to hear about some? And she said, yeah, I would. So I just started telling her about some of my dear friends who happened to be chickens. And she was like loving the stories. They know their names. They come running through the dog door when you call their name. And I was telling her about these dear friends of mine. And that's all I did, was share these stories of amazing chickens in my life. And the woman just got quiet and she said, wow. She said, I guess I don't eat chicken anymore. And I said, you're probably going to be happy about that decision. But you see, I don't come at it with, oh, you bad person. Why do you eat chicken? I just asked her questions. Oh, how did you choose chickens? Of all the animals you could choose. So that's more my kind of advocacy, is asking people questions, you know. So, you know, people like to make jokes with vegans, like, you know, jokes about things that are painful for us. And when someone does that, you know, what I say to them is, oh, what would make you say that to me, knowing that it would break my heart? And they get to look at it. They really get to look at it. And so I'm more about, you know, asking the questions. Or somebody will say, oh, and we've all heard this, I used to be vegetarian, or I used to be vegan. And instead of going, how could you? How could you do that? How could you turn your back on it? I say, oh, how does that feel? To have once been committed to something and then to no longer be committed to it, is it difficult to do? You know, like I'll ask questions that just get people sort of questioning themselves and looking into their hearts and coming to their own conclusions. You know, is this really how I want to live? Is this the most compassionate choice I can make? That's not for me to decide for them. They need to come to it. They need to look in their hearts. So my favorite things are really simple things. Like if somebody said, you can have the best vegan ice cream, or you can have this perfectly ripe mango. Give me that mango. So I like really simple foods. That doesn't mean that I don't like celebrate with some pretty fun foods. I don't know, I just think about what like came off a tree, you know, like a really good apple that's still warm from the tree. Those are my favorite kind of things. Or when we're in Mexico in the winter, just like those foods that are just like ripened on the tree, and there's nothing like it. Like we'll get a pineapple and we'll be like, isn't this the best? You know, we're so grateful to be eating this amazing food. That said, sometimes I say I'm a vegan carnivore because I ate meat for 3 meals a day when I was a kid. And so those foods that people call transition foods, the mock meats, whether it's hot dogs or sausages or the fish fillet things, these vegan alternatives, I love them. You know, I don't eat them every day. I don't make them my staple foods, but I also don't deny myself, you know. So it's like, oh, I really feel like eating something that tastes like fish. And then I'll have like Gardein fish, you know, like I'll have one of those, what people call transition foods. And then I can be a little embarrassed sometimes, like, well, it's not really a transition food since I've been vegan for 45 years. You know, I think I've already transitioned into what I'm going to be eating. But I don't deny myself. If I want it, I have that. Typical day of foods would be like a green smoothie in the morning, which I love. Oh, in that I put kale and spinach and frozen pineapple, organic pineapple that's really sweet, turmeric, fresh turmeric, ginger, lime, boatloads of lime in everything because it makes everything taste better. And Yeah, so I just like blend up whatever we have that's perfectly ripe, and we both love that. We love it a lot. Lots of greens, though, and beets. I just put raw beets in there, too. That's my favorite breakfast, I think. My partner, JC, his favorite breakfast is organic grits with greens. He's the king of grits. Let's see, lunch. Oh, lunch varies so much. Typical. Typical would be like a roll-up that is mostly, if you looked at it, it's like here's the roll-up, this big, and this much of it is greens. Because I love greens. Dinner varies a lot. We eat a lot of beans, a lot of soups. I know people who are raw foodists, and we do incorporate a lot of raw into ours, but I like warm comfort food. In terms of resources that I recommend to people, I have to admit I'm a little out of it when it comes to the current options. Like, there are so many options now that weren't available even 10 years ago. Definitely 20 years ago weren't available. So I think that there are a lot of resources out there that I'm clueless about. So it has to be really big and bold and popular for me to even come across it. I think that there are YouTube channels and blogs, and people have to find the one that works for them. Some of them are more spirituality based. Some of them are more hardcore science. Some of them are activists and people doing direct action. That happens to be my favorite stuff, is the direct action, because I love that these brave people are doing this, that they are going in and often risking their lives and risking arrest, and that's who I would want them speaking up for me if I were imprisoned and I was innocent, which is what we're talking about with all the animals who are used in agriculture. And so I love those resources. If you're looking for food resources, they're infinite, of course, the blogs and podcasts, and there's so much out there. Films. There are life-changing films and books. Like, for me, there are perspective-changing books. Like, there's a book called Ishmael, and that book is incredible, by Daniel Quinn. It's not specifically vegan, but that book helps humans see just how arrogant we are, how we think we're like the top of the heap, or, creation looks like this. God made, the creation story that humans made up. Oh, God made this creature, this creature, this creature, and then humans. And that's the end of creation. So that book really looks at the arrogance of humans. So I love that book. Film, there's so many good ones. The most recent one that I found to be just so incredible and surprised me was Game Changers. I didn't expect to love it because I'm not a big sports fan. I like doing things. I like hiking and biking and, swimming. I like doing all that. But watching it, not my thing. So I thought the film would be kind of like, oh, this is for like sports fans. And that film blew me away. And it has really affected a lot of people who are, for me, it's a little bit more of a human selfishness one. Like, oh, if I eat like this, then I'll feel like this. So to me, that's a little bit not my usual passion, the more self-centered, what's in it for me. But they did a beautiful job of it. And most humans are very self-centered, so can reach a lot of people. This attachment we have to certain species, it's like you have that attachment because they're in your family. Not because they're any better than other species. Yeah. They're just part of your family. It's why we love dogs. It's why we don't eat dogs in this culture, because we're close to them. One Thanksgiving, my dad called and he's like, hey, why aren't you coming to Thanksgiving here? And I said, we're going to have vegan Thanksgiving with the vegan part of the family. And he said, do you care more about your animal rights than you do about family? And I said, no, I wouldn't say that. I said, but I would rather be the person who cares more about her core values than getting together with family when there is a dead animal in the middle of the table. I'd rather be that person than the person who cares more about his taste buds than family. Because there are 6 of us who won't be there because you're choosing to have a dead bird in the middle of the table. And he said, well, but that's not fair. We're talking just about like, it's just a turkey. And I said, right. I said, so if I was having a meal served at my house and it was a dog being served in the middle of the table, would you come? And he said, no, absolutely not. I said, that turkey is the same for me, exactly the same. You know, it's those kinds of things where we have these categories. You know, this one's part of my family, this one isn't. If someone is thinking about practicing veganism, you know, it's kind of overwhelming, especially now it's overwhelming because there's a bazillion blogs, different websites with recipes, podcasts. There are so many directions to go. And most people who are starting, their first questions are like, what am I going to eat? What am I going to cook? It's not what am I going to wear. They figure that one out. But what am I going to eat? What am I going to cook? And what I usually tell people is, think about your favorite things that you eat now. Whatever your favorite things are, your foods that you sit down to that are your familiars, any of those can be veganized. So the internet is like this fabulous tool now that definitely wasn't there when I went vegan. And, you know, that's what I tell people, like, hey, oh, you like that kind of dish? Just Google vegan with that name and you will find 10,000 hits for how to do that recipe vegan, and then choose and experiment and don't close your mind. Once you've happened upon something, you'll be like, oh, this is mine. But keep trying, experimenting. You know, people will say, oh, I hate vegan cheese. And I'm like, you just haven't found your vegan cheese. Oh, I hate those vegan milks. Oh, you haven't found your vegan milk. Keep trying, experiment. It's different tastes for different people. And you know, it ends up feeling so easy. What can feel overwhelming in the beginning to people because they're used to throwing a hamburger in a pan or a steak on the grill or whatever it is, it becomes familiar so fast.